Good afternoon. I've spent the last 34 days traveling the length and breadth of this incredible country. It's been my privilege to speak to hundreds of thousands of Canadians. If there's one thing I hear over and over from everyone, from all walks of life, is that things must change. We cannot carry on the way we're going. The country can't afford more division. We can't afford more of the same. A lot of Canadians, too many Canadians, are scared. Prices are out of control. Spending is out of control. Secure jobs are harder to find. When they look to the future, they're not filled with hope. They're frightened. They're worried. When they look to the future, they don't see a home being affordable. They don't see a pension. They don't see security. They see only endless struggle. Not everyone can make a living on Zoom calls. Avec moi, personne ne sera laissé pour compte dans ce pays. Jamais. Présentement, les gens ressentent de la peur. Ils éprouvent aussi de la colère. Une grande partie de cette colère est justifiée. It will never be acceptable to me that anyone in this country be left behind. Never. Fear isn't the only thing people are feeling. There's anger too, and much of it justified. There's a lot of people in this country who are angry at Mr. Trudeau. He only wants to talk about the protesters because it suits him. But there are millions more that are upset with him. Decent, hard-working people who are struggling with higher prices, who are tired of his pious lectures and hypocrisy, especially when it comes to ethics, health, or his feminist credentials. People who simply can't understand why the Prime Minister would call a $600 million election in the middle of a pandemic if he cared about their health. These Canadians don't spend their time on Twitter. They don't watch the parliamentary channel, and they're certainly not Ottawa insiders. Aux Canadiens qui ont peur, qui sont en colère et qui se sentent oubliés, je dis ceci. Je vous comprends parfaitement. Mon objectif est de construire un Canada qui fonctionne pour tout le monde. Un Canada où on valorise le respect. Un Canada où on récompense le travail acharné. Un Canada où on peut brandir notre drapeau sans gêne. Un pays où on peut exprimer notre fierté d'être Canadien. To Canadians who are fearful, angry, and feeling let down, let me say this. I get it. My driving purpose is to build a Canada that works for all of us, a Canada of respect, a Canada of hard work, a Canada where we're not ashamed to fly our flag or express our pride as Canadians. Are we perfect? Of course not. Can we do better as a country? Absolutely. But make no mistake, Canada is the best nation on earth. I am proud of this country and its people. Canadians are a wonderful, welcoming, and generous people. And don't let anyone tell you differently. C'est très clair. Tout va s'impérer si Justin Trudeau est récompensé pour avoir déclenché une élection de 600 millions de dollars au milieu de la pandémie. Le ton moralisateur, l'hypocrisie et l'augmentation des prix. Make no mistake, if Justin Trudeau is rewarded for calling a $600 million election in the middle of a pandemic, everything you've come to dislike about Mr. Trudeau, the lectures, the division in this country, the hypocrisy, the rising prices, they will all only get worse. There's a lot at stake in this election. Justin Trudeau wants you to stay at home on Election Day. He wants you to vote for smaller parties. He wants you to let him get away with his corruption. À ceux qui en ont assez de se faire la morale, assez d'être oubliés et assez de payer toujours plus cher pour financer la dette de Justin Trudeau. Vous devez faire la seule chose que Justin Trudeau ne veut pas, c'est de voter conservateur lundi. For those who are tired of being lectured, tired of being let down, and tired of being stuck with higher prices to pay for Justin Trudeau's massive debt, you need to do the one thing Justin Trudeau doesn't want you to do, and that is to vote Conservative on Monday. Friends, Justin Trudeau controlled the timing of this unnecessary $600 million pandemic election, but he doesn't control your vote. Your vote is your future. Your vote is your power. Votez pour une relance économique. Votez pour protéger votre avenir. Votez conservateur. Your vote is the only way to stop Mr. Trudeau from gaining even more power. Your vote is the only way to get the change we desperately need in this country. So vote for Canada. Vote to secure the future. Vote Conservative. Thank you. Merci beaucoup.
We will now be taking questions. Nous allons maintenant prendre les questions. First question.
Hi there, Mr. O'Toole. Travis Damraj, CBC News. My question is, Alberta accounts for 43% of all active COVID cases in the country, but only represents 12% of the population in Canada. Do you think that that has anything to do with provincial policies?
As Prime Minister, I would work with Alberta, British Columbia, Nova Scotia, Ontario, all of our provinces in the fight against COVID-19. I would make sure we're fast on the border and fast with secure and stable supplies of vaccines. We are in the fourth wave. It is a tough wave in many parts of this country. And Mr. Trudeau called an election. He didn't work with people, he's dividing people. A $600 million election that only suits Justin Trudeau. Well, he started it. On Monday, Canadians can end it. En pleine d'une pandémie, la quatrième vague, avec les défis en Alberta, à travers le pays, on doit lutter contre la COVID-19 ensemble. Mais M. Trudeau, il a déclenché une élection inutile de 600 millions de dollars parce que c'est toujours un enjeu de lui. C'est juste ses intérêts, pas les intérêts des Canadiens. Et lundi, on doit voter pour un changement.
Thank you. My follow-up, Mr. O'Toole, do you feel the next Prime Minister of Canada should be held accountable and answer the substance of questions directly as opposed to pivoting to talking points as you did just now and multiple times yesterday?
I think in a health and economic crisis, which has raged in this country for 18 months, a Prime Minister needs to bring all provinces together, all Canadians together in our collective fight against COVID-19. I will work with provinces and premiers of all political stripes. I'll work with all Canadians on our front lines to fight COVID-19. I would never take my eye off the ball and call an election, a $600 million election that only Mr. Trudeau wanted. We need to work together, and we need a Prime Minister that builds up this country, doesn't tear it down.
Next question.
Kevin Gallagher, CTV National News. In fairness, Mr. O'Toole, I think all Canadians know that this is an election and a pandemic. They know that Justin Trudeau called it. But you were asked several times specifically yesterday to talk about the situation in Alberta. You barely mentioned the province or its people. Do you have anything to say to them today for the fourth wave that they're going through?
Let me say to Albertans and families even in southwestern Ontario where we lost a young child, we will stand and fight COVID-19 alongside you. And if there's anything the provinces need, including a steady supply of vaccines, including leadership on rapid tests, I will be there as Prime Minister. I would never put my political interests ahead of the health of Canadians. Even the Justin Trudeau of a few months ago said you don't have a pandemic election. He changed his mind because it's always about him. The $600 million we're spending now could be used in our fight in Alberta, in British Columbia, here in southwestern Ontario. I will bring the country together, and that is what we need on Monday.
En français, votre message aux Albertains, s'il vous plaît.
Pour les Albertains, pour les familles en Ontario, on a perdu un enfant en Ontario à cause de COVID-19. La quatrième vague est grave. Et M. Trudeau a déclenché une élection inutile de 600 millions de dollars. Comme Premier ministre, je vais être un rassembleur et je vais travailler en étroite collaboration avec toutes les provinces, avec tous les Canadiens pour le bien-être, pour la santé de notre pays.
We still haven't heard you talk about Jason Kenney. You would not answer specific questions as to whether you still have the opinion that the Premier of Alberta, Jason Kenney, did a better job managing the pandemic than Justin Trudeau. Yesterday in an interview, you mentioned the Premier of Nova Scotia, Tim Houston. So you know Premiers' names. What is your opinion on the handling of the pandemic by Jason Kenney?
I know Premiers' names. The most important thing is I don't care about their political party. I care about the Canadians in their provinces. I wish we had a Prime Minister that did that. I wish we had a Prime Minister that didn't try and pick fights in an election he called in a pandemic, when we could be working together, all political stripes, to help people. A family in Ontario lost a child this week, and we're in an election, a $600 million election, only for Mr. Trudeau. And after ethical scandals, cover-ups, him always putting himself first, on Monday, people have a choice. Mr. Trudeau called the election, but I'm asking Canadians to finish it and vote for change.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, Mike Couture with Global National. You keep saying that you're not going to pick fights with provinces, but leading a country like Canada really is about making tough choices that may be unpopular with premiers. Are you not ready to do that?
I'm ready to work with all premiers, and I've provided them a roadmap of what Canada's Conservatives will provide. It's Canada's recovery plan. It's jobs in all sectors and all regions. It's accountability after countless cover-ups by Mr. Trudeau. It's about leadership on mental health, something that's going to be a shadow pandemic for many years. It's about being ready for a future pandemic, not shutting the pandemic warning system down like Mr. Trudeau did. And it's about getting our finances in order, because the cost of living crisis in southwestern Ontario, in all parts of this country, is pricing Canadians out of their own community. And Mr. Trudeau and Mr. Singh will only make it worse. So the premiers, I look forward to working with them on Canada's recovery.
Just as a follow-up, I've got a bit of a preamble here, so please bear with me. On October 14th, 2006, Jess La Rochelle saved countless Canadian lives. An RPG destroyed his gun and broke his back, yet he managed to fire off 15 M72 rockets to win a crucial battle with the Taliban. The next day, he helped carry his friend's casket. He was awarded the Medal of Military Valor, but a group of vets that include General Rick Hillier believe a mistake was made. They believe that he deserves a Canadian Victoria Cross. La Rochelle's in hospital and not doing well. So will you commit to urging the Governor General, who does make the decision on these medals, to expedite a review of his case?
I think Mr. La Rochelle's bravery was heroic and is worthy of consideration for a Victoria Cross. I'm very proud of the men and women who serve in our Canadian Armed Forces and that served in that mission with distinction and unparalleled courage. The situation in Afghanistan that's tumbling into crisis is hard for military families who left a piece of themselves in that country. Yet another reason why we should not have had an election. We should have made sure that anyone that's at risk in Afghanistan because they served alongside Mr. La Rochelle and our veterans are taken care of. As Prime Minister, I will never leave someone behind like Mr. Trudeau has.
Prochaine question.
Oui, bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole, Laurence Martin de Radio-Canada. Vous avez 34 sièges en Ontario en ce moment. Si vous en gagnez moins lundi, est-ce un échec pour vous?
On va gagner plus de sièges en Ontario et de nation à l'autre. Parce qu'au début de la campagne, j'ai lancé notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. Je suis un chef éthique, expérimenté et prêt pour les défis devant nous, comme la 4e vague de la pandémie. Mais M. Trudeau, il a déclenché une élection inutile de 600 millions de dollars. Les Ontariens, les Canadiens, les Québécois méritent mieux et on doit voter pour mieux lundi. I'm a leader that is experienced, ethical, and ready for the challenges in front of us. We need change on Monday because the leader we have launched a $600 million election rather than put the needs of the country first. On Monday, I know we will win more support in Ontario and across this country, and I'm asking Canadians not to reward Mr. Trudeau, but to send a message that we deserve a government for them.
Avec combien de sièges est-ce que vous seriez satisfait en Ontario, M. O'Toole? Vous en avez 34 en ce moment.
Plus que 34. J'aimerais recevoir l'appui des Ontariens, des Québécois, des Canadiens d'une nation à l'autre. On a un autre 3 jours dans cette campagne et je vais travailler très fort chaque minute pour le bien-être des Canadiens. Juste comme j'ai servi en uniforme, je suis ici pour les Canadiens, pas pour les intérêts de les petits amis comme M. Trudeau. I hope to win more seats not only in Ontario, but in all parts of this country. And for the next 3 days of this campaign, I'm going to be talking about our plan for Canada's recovery. I'm going to be talking about deserving better than the Prime Minister who calls a pandemic election. And I trust that Canadians will vote for a positive change to get this country back on track.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Henri Ouellet du Journal La Presse. Monsieur O'Toole, dans vos remarques aujourd'hui, vous dites « Justin Trudeau veut que vous restiez à la maison le jour des élections. » Vous dites qu'il veut que vous votiez pour les plus petits partis. Puis vous appelez surtout à voter conservateur. Donc ma question est très simple. Est-ce que vous êtes en train d'appeler à voter stratégique?
Non, M. Trudeau a déclenché une élection en pleine d'une pandémie. C'est difficile pour les électeurs. Et pour les Québécois, pour les Canadiens, il y a seulement un chef qui peut remplacer M. Trudeau. Et c'est moi et les conservateurs. Donc, les Québécois, les Canadiens méritent un choix. Notre pays, on mérite un changement. Et lundi, on doit voter pour un changement avec les conservateurs.
En suivi, Justin Trudeau vous a accusé ce matin d'être incapable de pouvoir rallier les progressistes. Il affirme que votre gouvernement ferait reculer le Canada, puis il a soutenu que les Canadiens auraient honte d'un gouvernement conservateur à la prochaine conférence sur le climat à Glasgow. Qu'est-ce que vous lui répondez à ce sujet?
Les Canadiens, les Québécois méritent mieux que les mensonges par M. Trudeau. Il a manqué ses objectifs de Paris chaque année comme Premier ministre. Il a brisé sa promesse sur une élection en pleine d'une pandémie. Il a brisé ses promesses sur l'eau potable, sur le budget, sur l'économie, sur la transparence. On a besoin d'un changement, un leader qui va livrer la marchandise pour l'environnement, pour une relance économique et pour protéger notre avenir.
Next question.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Toole. Stephanie Taylor with the Canadian Press. You say Mr. Trudeau wants people to vote for smaller parties. What are the names of those smaller parties?
There are 5 parties running in this election. Canadians know the names. I'm not going to advertise them. But there's really only 2 choices. Mr. Trudeau and more of the same, more out-of-control debt, higher taxes, more corruption. Or the other choice, Canada's Conservatives, our recovery plan, a plan that will bring the country together, not divide it, a plan to be more prepared in the future, and a plan to make sure we get Canada back on its feet after a difficult year. It's a pandemic election. It's an expensive vanity project of Mr. Trudeau, but Canadians can vote for a team that will deliver an economic recovery in all parts of this country. Il y a 5 partis dans cette élection, mais en réalité, seulement 2 choix. M. Trudeau, avec plus de dettes, plus de déficit, plus de scandales et aucune opportunité. Ou un autre choix. Les conservateurs, avec un plan pour le rétablissement du Canada, avec un contrat avec les Québécois et les Québécoises, avec un leader qui va livrer sur les enjeux importants pour les Canadiens, pour les Québécois. Donc, il y a un choix important lundi. On doit choisir un changement avec les conservateurs.
Some of the people who are angry that you referenced in your remarks, these are people, some of the angry people protesting Mr. Trudeau are PPC supporters. We know that. Your team's seen the photos. We've seen the polls. So why do you think people, including Conservatives, are gravitating towards Mr. Bernier?
Thank you for the question, Stephanie. As I said in my remarks today, Mr. Trudeau will focus on the protesters, but there's actually millions of Canadians who are very frustrated with Mr. Trudeau.
And why do they like the PPC?
That are tired of his broken promise, tired of the division, the national unity divisions we have that simply weren't there before Mr. Trudeau. And if they allow that frustration to do anything other than vote Conservative, they're voting for Mr. Trudeau. So as I said, there are 5 parties. There's 2 choices: more of the same with Mr. Trudeau, or real change, an ethical government with a plan with Canada's Conservatives.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, Monsieur O'Toole. Stéphanie Marin de la presse canadienne. Ce matin, Justin Trudeau a dit que dans votre tentative de rallier les Canadiens, vous êtes prêt à accepter n'importe qui dans le Parti conservateur, y compris des anti-vaccins. Est-ce que c'est exact?
Absolument non. Au début de mon leadership, j'ai fait une annonce pour tous les Canadiens. Les communautés culturelles, la communauté LGBTQ, les syndicats, les minorités. Je suis ici pour tous les Canadiens, tous les Québécois et leur bien-être. C'est pourquoi j'ai lancé un plan au début de la campagne pour le rétablissement du Canada. Nous sommes en pleine d'une élection inutile de 600 millions de dollars, mais c'est une opportunité pour un changement réel avec les conservateurs. We're in the middle of a $600 million election for Justin Trudeau, but it's time for a change with the Conservatives. There are many parties in this race, but there's really only 2 choices: more of the same with Mr. Trudeau or Canada's Conservatives.
Et dans votre appel à ne pas voter pour les petits partis, ce que vous venez de faire ce matin, est-ce que vous faites ça parce que vous craignez que le Parti populaire du Canada de Maxime Bernier vous enlève des votes à un moment où vous en avez besoin?
Comme j'ai dit, je suis le seul chef qui peut remplacer M. Trudeau. Le seul chef. Et je suis le seul chef avec un plan détaillé pour le futur. Je suis le seul chef avec un plan d'action pour l'identité québécoise. Je suis le seul chef avec un bilan comme un rassembleur. Et on a une campagne positive, ciblée sur le bien-être, la santé et l'économie des Canadiens. Donc, il y a un choix lundi. Et on a besoin d'un changement avec les conservateurs.
Next question.
Kate Bellingera from Bloomberg. Polls indicate that there will be a minority government. Whether it's Liberal or Conservative, would you work with Trudeau to pass legislation?
I'm going to work these next 3 days to keep talking about my plan and to earn the trust of as many Canadians as I can. Canadians are tired of Mr. Trudeau and the scandals and the lack of direction. They're let down from Jody Wilson-Raybould to families here in southwestern Ontario. They want change, and I'm inviting them to make that with Canada's Conservatives, who are growing, that have a positive vision for our country, and we will look at the results on Monday and always put the country first. We shouldn't be in an election of $600 million, but we can use this as an opportunity for change for Mr. Trudeau.
If the Liberals are re-elected, are you worried about losing your spot as Conservative leader?
Let me repeat, the election has 3 more days, and we launched our plan on the first day of the campaign, Canada's Recovery Plan. And just yesterday in Halifax, I was talking to some people that heard about it for the first time. So I'm going to use every minute to talk about our positive vision for jobs, for the economy, to bring the country together, to stop dividing it. People are upset we're in a $600 million pandemic election, but there's a chance on Monday to vote for change, for positive change for Canada. And I'm asking them, Canadians, to vote Conservative. On a un plan pour notre avenir. Et pour les prochains 3 jours, je vais parler sur ma vision pour le futur, notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. Hier, à Halifax, j'ai parlé avec un électeur qui a entendu pour la première fois notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. Donc, je vais continuer de faire ça pour un autre 3 jours et on va voir les résultats. Mais lundi, c'est une chance pour un changement en pleine d'une élection. Dans une pandémie, on a besoin d'un changement avec les conservateurs.
Prochaine question.
Bonjour, M. O'Toole, Olivier Ferron-Boissé de TVA. Je vais vous parler de sondage. Il y a une des circonscriptions que vous allez visiter aujourd'hui qui donne environ un peu plus que 7 % des intentions de vote au Parti populaire. Alors, je me demandais, n'êtes-vous pas tenté d'inviter ces électeurs-là à voter stratégiquement pour vous aider justement à bloquer le parti de Justin Trudeau?
Comme j'ai dit, il y a 3 petits partis dans cette course, mais seulement 2 choix. Les libéraux avec les scandales, dettes, des impôts, ou les conservateurs. Et je suis le seul chef qui peut remplacer M. Trudeau. Donc, pour le Québec, pour tous les Canadiens et Canadiennes, si vous voulez un changement, votez conservateur.
En suivi, j'aimerais revenir sur vos propos d'hier concernant le variant Delta. Vous disiez que vous l'auriez mieux contrôlé que Justin Trudeau. Vous aviez parlé de votre approche qui aurait été de fermer les frontières à certains pays. Or, on sait que le variant Delta est dans tous les pays. Croyez-vous réellement qu'en ne ciblant que quelques pays, ça aurait été suffisant pour empêcher le Delta d'entrer au Canada?
M. Trudeau était lent à la frontière tout le temps. Au début de la pandémie, avec les vols entre la Chine et le Canada, l'Iran et l'Italie et le Canada, et après, dans les prochaines vagues, avec les autres pays comme l'Inde. Et on a demandé au début, on doit fermer la frontière pour protéger nos citoyens. C'est primordial en pleine d'une pandémie. M. Trudeau était lent. Et maintenant, en pleine de la 4e vague de la pandémie, il a déclenché une élection inutile de 600 millions de dollars. M. Trudeau va toujours placer ses intérêts, avant la santé des Canadiens. Et les Canadiens, les Québécois méritent mieux. Since the beginning of this pandemic, we asked for closures and control of the border. Originally in the first wave between China, Iran, and Italy and Canada, and later in later waves between India. Mr. Trudeau was late at every step, late on an area of federal responsibility. And now, in the 4th wave of the pandemic, he launched an election, a $600 million election, rather than focusing on the health and well-being of Canadians. I will always focus on the health, our economic future, and bringing the country together.
Next question.
Ian Bailey, Globe and Mail. You received a high-profile endorsement from former Progressive Conservative Prime Minister Brian Mulroney, but none from Stephen Harper, who represents a significant constituency in your party. Why is that, and what does that situation say to the many supporters and admirers of Stephen Harper within the big tent party you're leading?
I was very proud to serve in the Harper government, and I was the last cabinet minister from that period, resolving concerns with Veterans Affairs, bringing people together, resolving things, not dividing them like Mr. Trudeau. I'm fortunate to call on the advice of all of our previous leaders to try and make sure we put together a plan to get this country back on track from a health and an economic standpoint. And those efforts led to Canada's recovery plan. And as leader, I will bring the country together. We're in a $600 million pandemic election that even a few months ago Mr. Trudeau said was inappropriate. He broke yet another promise because he'll always put his narrow, liberal political interests before the well-being of Canadians. So I think Canadians deserve a change on Monday.
Follow-up, when did you last speak to Mr. Harper, and did you invite him to join you on the campaign trail?
As I've said, I speak to all of our former leaders, and I've even spoken to leaders from different parties in my year as leader of the opposition. I spoke to Mr. Harper this week. I've spoken to Mr. Mulroney this week. I'll speak to mayors, premiers of all political stripes, because I will always put the country first. It's why I served in uniform. It's why I suspended my leadership when the pandemic starts. It's why I sent advice to the ministers in the Trudeau government. I will always put the country first, and after 6 years of division, 6 years of scandal, 6 years of being slow, Mr. Trudeau's pandemic election is a time for change, and I'm asking for people's trust on Monday. On a parlé avec tous nos anciens dirigeants, parce que pour moi, on doit s'engager avec tous les Canadiens. Je vais parler avec les maires, les mairesses, les dirigeants autochtones pour préparer un plan d'action après la pandémie, notre plan pour le rétablissement du Canada. Et après 6 ans de division, d'inaction sur les dossiers importants, 6 ans de scandale, de dépenses sans limite, les Canadiens méritent mieux et j'espère que lundi, je vais recevoir l'appui des Canadiens pour un changement réel.
Next question.
Craig Needles from Blackburn News. Maxime Bernier was in London earlier this week in this riding, in fact, and had very, very large crowds of supporters. Traditionally, Conservatives have rejected strategic voting. Are you asking the people who were in those crowds to vote strategically? And if so, why should they do that?
I said in my remarks today, there's 5 parties in this race, but there's really only 2 choices. More of the same with Justin Trudeau or Canada's Conservatives. I understand why people are frustrated, why they're angry with Mr. Trudeau, who's divided this country. If you want change, if you want to get our economy back on track, if you want to see less division in this country, there's one option on Monday. That's Canada's Conservatives and our recovery plan for this great country.
Polling would tell us there are people who may not take that option. In ridings like this one, like London West, where it's very, very close, are you concerned that the number of people who vote for the PPC instead of your party might swing enough races to keep Justin Trudeau on as Prime Minister?
Well, in London West, we have Rob Flack, who's with me, an outstanding business leader, a volunteer, a passionate person from London who wants to put the community first, as opposed to representing Mr. Trudeau's interests here in this city. We deserve change here. And if people vote for anything other than the Conservative Party of Canada for that change, they're voting for Justin Trudeau. That's why Mr. Trudeau called this election in a pandemic, a $600 million election for himself. He's hoping you stay home. He's hoping you express your frustration by going elsewhere. I'm inviting Canadians who want to see a change, who want to see a better government, an ethical government for a change, vote Conservative on Monday, and in London West, vote for Rob Flack.
Next question.
Mr. O'Toole, it's Norman DeMono, the London Free Press, just picking up on what my friend Mr. Needle said. How concerned are you about a loss of Conservative support in London West and also in the outlying regions, which have been a Conservative bedrock for many years, but the PPC is certainly surging there as well? And are you concerned about the erosion of your support?
London is one of our great cities, historic, long military ties. I've got family here. It's a very important part of Ontario. When we need it on its feet, we need to see an economic recovery here. And we're only going to get that if we see a change in Ottawa, if we replace a tired and corrupt Trudeau Liberal government with Canada's Conservatives. Any other choice is actually a vote for Mr. Trudeau. So I'm inviting people, check out Canada's recovery plan, check out our incredible candidates, vote for change, and particularly in a $600 million pandemic election, are you going to reward Mr. Trudeau by voting for one of the 3 other parties? Vote for change, vote to send a message, vote Conservative.
By way of follow-up, I'm going to go back to the Alberta and the COVID situation there. And it was not long ago that you suggested that, in fact, of course, Jason Kenney was doing a terrific job there in Alberta. Of course, the facts have played out quite differently. Is it about time you say that you come out and say, you know what, the situation's changed. It's a different situation now than it was. I'm changing my position on that. In fact, Alberta has not done a very good job.
In all my conversations with premiers throughout my year as leader, I've tried to say, what can we do to advance your interests? What can we do to work together? All provinces in this country. You don't build up the team by tearing down or separating parts of it. Mr. Trudeau has divided people for 6 years. He's always put himself first. This $600 million pandemic election is yet another example of a broken promise by Mr. Trudeau and another example of hypocrisy and hubris of Mr. Trudeau. So I'm saying to Canadians to vote for change so that we can bring this country together, so that we can get the economy back on its feet, and so that we can fight COVID-19 together.
This will be the last question. Ce sera la dernière question.
Good afternoon, Mr. O'Toole. It's Chris Selly from the National Post. Throughout this campaign, and again today, you've said it was a reckless time for the government to take its eyes off the ball and contest an election. One conclusion people might draw from that, and it seems some Canadians are, according to the polls, is that it would be best to stick with the devil they know, to get Mr. Trudeau and his ministers back to work managing the pandemic and managing the recovery, which is where you seem to say they should be right now. With 3 days left, I'm wondering what you would say to undecided voters overall, and then specifically in the GTA and in adjacent areas like this. Why should they take a risk on you?
For people that are frustrated with this election, and there are many, we hear this on the doors in all parts of this country, they're worried that a government will put its own interests ahead of staying on top of the fourth wave. They're spending $600 million that could be used on the front lines to give our nurses, our front lines, a break. Rather than bringing all levels of government together, they're dividing them. They're dividing Canadians on public health. They're putting their own interests first. So I'm asking Canadians on Monday, do not reward Mr. Trudeau for a pandemic election. Don't reward Mr. Trudeau for spending $600 million on his power grab and not on the crisis. Check out Canada's recovery plan at conservative.ca. We put it out. We're running a positive vision, and the Conservative Party is offering a future that can be positive, a united country, and a recovery in all sectors and in all regions. It's time for change on Monday.
And I just wanted to follow up on a colleague's question about how you would have kept new variants of the coronavirus out of Canada, and how you would manage the threat of new coronaviruses, or of new variants rather. It's all very well to ban flights from India or China or Iran. We've banned flights from Britain in the past. The weakest link has always been the Canada-US border. We have 100,000 or so essential crossers a week, not tested, not necessarily vaccinated. Are there things you would have done differently in the past to secure that weakness, that potential risk, and things you might do in the future if we face something as bad or worse than Delta?
It's a good question, Chris. Mr. Trudeau canceled the pandemic warning system months before the pandemic. He was slow at the border in the countries you mentioned. He was slow to deploy a national system of rapid screening and testing, something we've been demanding for 18 months for our land border. We need to have the tools, vaccines, rapid tests, and working together in this pandemic. I've said that those three tools, including information, are what we need to get to Canadians, to get to work together, to fight COVID-19. We should not be in a pandemic election. All parties voted against it. Mr. Trudeau said it's not proper to hold a pandemic election. Then he launches one for his own interest. So we need a government that's ethical, focused, and that will always put the interests of Canadians first. The only option to vote for that change is Canada's Conservatives on Monday, and I'm asking people for their trust and vote.
It will be all for today. Ce sera tout pour aujourd'hui. Merci. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Merci beaucoup.
A couple more questions here.